Hey guys, I hope all is well. I am back in Path of Exile Necropolis League with a build that will utilize the new unique shield ManaStorm. And as the shield gives added lightning damage, I thought to make a lightning-based character which I appropriately named Storm. I didn't know what lightning spell I wanted to play, so I played around with different lightning spells to see what felt right. And I ended up sticking to mostly Arc for general clearing, and I finally come to the conclusion that I would use Storm Brand for a single target. My Arc is perfectly viable on a 4-link, dealing about 2.5 million DPS for clearing packs, and of course Vaal Arc, which significantly boosts stat damage due to giving Arc lucky damage, and the chaining aspect of Arc makes it phenomenal for farming Legion, Incursion, Blight, Breach, and anything else where you have to kill a lot of mobs all at once. For my much stronger DPS, I originally went with Crackling Lance on a 6-link. However, I didn't like that I was required to stand still to truly optimize on the DPS. So I ended up going Storm Brand, which does about 2 million DPS, but since I can place 2 of them, it's more like 4 million single target DPS. Not to mention, I'm able to cast my Arc while the enemy has 2 brands on them, so I'm actually at about 6.5 to 7 million single target DPS, which is pretty damn awesome. Real quick, I just want to ask you guys to leave some feedback and let me know what builds you might be interested in seeing in the future, and please like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. As far as the playstyle goes, my movement speed is a little low, and I didn't like using shield charge because I don't like accidentally charging straight into the middle of a pack of enemies and having an off chance where my defensives fail me and I just get slapped. So I'm basically using a Quicksilver to run around. However, you can honestly use shield charge or whatever movement skill suits your playstyle. I cast Arc, which clears rather beautifully, especially when there's a ton of enemies like during a Breach or a Legion, and occasionally I just pop Vaal Arc and everything dies. Then when there's a particularly resistant, rare, or unique, I just put 2 Storm Brands on it and it gets knocked back constantly because I'm critting constantly, and that plus I use Focus and keep hitting it with Arc, and usually it doesn't take too long for it to go down, and that goes the same for bosses as well. So all in all, the build can clear most content. It can pick up at least the Eater and Exarch Voidstones, and it has high spell suppression, capped spell block, capped attack block, and even multiple ailment immunities. It does only have about 3k life, but that's perfectly fine and playable considering our defensive technology, and plus I like to play more on the careful side anyways instead of the zoomy hillbilly Rambo side, so it ended up working out for me personally. So League starting this character was a rather nice breeze. You can pretty much stick with Fireball until level 12, where you can literally pick up both Arc and Stormbrand and start using them right away. It's awesome. Then just get flat damage on gear, and on the tree get percent damage and cast speed to make it smooth and start building into crit multi, power charges, get life and mana on the way, and get block and suppression in higher levels. Getting good gear shouldn't be hard to replicate. It's mostly me buying good affixes and then me crafting an additional affix to suit my needs. Obviously, I started off with gear that wasn't as good as what I ended up with. I just ended up at this point after playing the game a bit and saving up some money. The most expensive thing is probably the Amulet, the +1 Fizz, +1 Lightning, and the helmet for sure. I highly doubt anyone's going to be able to replicate this that often. I got this for 1 Divine, and the biggest stroke of dumb luck I ever found someone selling this for 1 Divine. It's actually insane. But other than that, the meat of our damage is ironically coming not from our weapon, but from our shield, which is the new ManaStorm unique shield, which sacrifices 100% of our unreserved mana, then converts 50% of that mana into added lightning damage, which is flat damage for 4 seconds. So you could use this for attacks as well as spells if you wanted an attack-based lightning build as well. This buff will activate every single time you cast a spell and will keep the highest buff damage amount for 4 seconds. On top of that, the shield also increases your mana regen, gives you flat mana, restores flat mana every time you kill an enemy, and increases the amount of mana recovered from mana flasks. So yes, it does sacrifice 100% of your unreserved mana to give you a huge boost every single time you cast a spell, which creates a mana problem, obviously, but then it so graciously solves your mana problem by giving you back so much mana sustain that you don't even really need to worry too much about mana recovery. With that being said, I do still absolutely recommend building more into mana sustain in order to maximize your use of the damage boost so that your sacrificing more than just 1 mana, and just so the playstyle feels more comfortable and smooth. You kind of have to use your own judgment to see how much mana sustain is too much or unnecessary, but just try to get to the point where you're comfortable and try to avoid a situation where you're running out of more mana than you can recover, which causes you to stop casting spells or causes a delay in your casting. As it stands now, I personally have about 450 flat mana regen per second, and I'm pretty comfortable staying at that amount. It helps me especially on maps with mods that decrease my mana recovery. For our weapon, I personally was running a really strong crit dagger for a long time until I was able to save enough money to buy a void battery. We go extra into power charges in this build due to us building into crit, so I personally think a void battery is best suitable for our build. Void battery gives us flat mana, crit chance, cast speed, and +1 to maximum power charges, and 25% increased spell damage per power charge, which can easily overpower the -80% spell damage drawback of using the weapon, as long as you have at least 3 to 4 power charges, which we are running 8 at the moment, which gives us a 120% net increase in spell damage, which is pretty good. For our helm, body, gloves, and boots, you want to prioritize spell suppression. Make sure you get as much as you can, because being a witch doesn't give you too much access to spell suppression like a ranger or a duelist. After that, you want to prioritize life and resistances, and then any damage mitigation you can get, such as physical damage taken as damage of another element or physical damage reduction. We are a little girl in rags that ran away from home. We can't face tank too many hits, so try to bulk up. I do say all these things and then I show you a helmet like this, which I hit a stroke of dumb luck, like I said before, and bought for 1 divine, because I guess the guy selling it didn't know or care how valuable or how difficult it is to put together a helmet like this. It's a pure example of what the Necropolis crafting mechanic can do, literally like all haunted modifiers on this thing. So yeah, I decided to not use any pure defensive helm and just rolled with this instead because it just looks awesome. One thing I want to mention is I do get a 100% chance to avoid being chilled on my boots, because I get 100% chance to avoid being frozen on my Pantheon, and granting these immunities is absolutely crucial for a smooth playstyle. I also use Impulsa's Broken Heart for the extra clear speed and shock immunity. Once you have enough Eater of Worlds E-Core or enough money to buy a bunch of it, I would try to roll Apply Lightning Exposure on hit on your gloves, because this is an absolute massive boost in DPS. For my amulet, I would recommend a Strength or Dex or Strength Dex hybrid, because our gear and gems require it. We need about 98 Dex total and 155 Strength total, so if there are any empty affixes on your gear, try to get these 2 stats on them. Other than that, if you don't need any resistances on your amulet, then I'd go with at least life, then crit multi, and general mana affixes. Again, I say these things and then I show a +1 all +1 lightning amulet like this. It definitely is an endgame amulet, honestly, and totally unnecessary, so don't worry about getting something like this. It's just extra icing on the cake. For my rings, I would initially prioritize life and resistances and stats, but if you could spare some affixes, I highly recommend getting conductivity on hit on one of your rings, because this is not only efficient in terms of spacing so that you don't need to self-cast it or have a gem set up for it, but it's also amazing for our DPS. Other than that, I would focus on damage and cast speed. Or if you want to be more defensive and sustaining, you can even craft +1 to minimum endurance charges for an added layer of defense, which also synergizes pretty well with our defensive technology. Lastly, for my belt, I always opt for a Stygian Vise due to it having an Abyssal Jewel socket. On the belt, I prioritize life, resistances, and stats, and I also decided to craft Lucky Crit Chance while focused, because this is a huge boost to our crit chance and DPS. And for the jewel, I literally just had life, stats, and damage, but once I got enough money, I bought this bad boy, which not only gives me life and damage, but immunity to corrupted blood as well, which is amazing because generally people tend to craft immunity to bleeding and corrupted blood on their life flask, but if you're not careful, you can easily run out of charges on your life flask and you'll end up dying to a mob that spawns lots of corrupting blood orbs, which is honestly more common that I felt comfortable with, which is why I wanted constant corrupted blood immunity. and you could only find that on a corrupted jewel. From my personal experience, I've been seeing more mobs that afflict me with corrupted blood than mobs that afflict me with bleeding. So I'd say this immunity is pretty important when it comes to having a smooth and pleasant gameplay experience. For my flask setup, I'm running a Quicksilver with increased effect and percent life regen, a Diamond Flask with extra crit, and Granite Flask with poison immunity and a taste of hate for damage mitigation, and lastly, my Life Flask gives me bleed immunity. Alrighty, so let's talk about our gem setups. First up is my arc setup, which is Vaal Arc, Spell Echo, Power Charge on Crit, Arcane Surge. So this obviously isn't the highest DPS setup, but it is very efficient. This is because this setup is the bread and butter of our damage due to the fact that it sets up all 8 power charges effortlessly and grants us Arcane Surge, which boosts our damage and mana sustain. This link setup is also enough to comfortably clear packs while mapping, especially when using Vaal Arc, since Vaal Arc makes our regular arc damage lucky, which basically just increases our damage. Next up is our Storm Brand setup, which is Storm Brand, Swift Brand Support, Awaken Added Lightning, which you can just use regular Added Lightning while leveling and just pick this up when you get the money for it. Power Charge on Crit, which is good for power charge upkeep during boss fights, which is pretty important. Conk Effect, and increased crit damage. For our defensive auras, we are running Determination and Defiance Banner for us taking less damage from crits and us getting more armor in general so we can take more hits. Now we do have some new aura technology in the form of Call to Arms and Automation. A new very popular form of defensive tech is to link Call to Arms with Enduring Cry, because this will literally autocast Enduring Cry every time it's off cooldown. Enduring Cry is great because it scans how many enemies are near you and grants you endurance charges based on that. It taunts them, grants you a quick burst of light regen, and based on how many endurance charges you have, it will also grant you resistances and physical damage reduction as well. The fact that this is on autocast is amazing because this saves you from casting it yourself and also saves space on your skill bar. To utilize our endurance charges even further, we have a cast when damage taken Immortal Call link setup to give us even more tankiness and survivability whenever we do get hit. Next, we have Automation, which autocasts any instant spells, so I've decided to link it with Blood Rage because this will autocast it, and as we are mapping, we are generating frenzy charges, which further boosts our damage through increased cast speed and percent damage. And one thing to note is Blood Rage does drain your percent HP. However, our Enduring Cry setup recovers that HP, so there's really no loss there. And if you're uncomfortable with Blood Rage HP loss, just take it off during boss fights because you're not really gaining frenzy charges from hitting the boss. You're only gaining frenzy charges from killing mobs, and the bosses don't spawn too many mobs too often, so this might actually be not very beneficial. And I do utilize a Divine Blessing link setup with Wrath and Inspiration, which gives me a huge boost to DPS every time I cast it. And of course, I'm also running around with a Lightning Golem for added cast speed. So as for my Ascendencies, we go Shaper of Storms so that all of our hits can shock. We go Mastermind of Discord so that our exposure is much stronger. And we go Heart of Destruction for bosses and tougher uniques. And then we go Bastion of Elements for that layer of defense once we start mapping. So I will admit I am trying to do a lot on this skill tree. I'm trying to get damage, block, spell suppression, power charges, jewel sockets, percent life, and percent mana. It's kind of all over the place, but that's okay. If it weren't for me wanting to make use of ManaStorm, I could drop the chase for mana and focus more on other things and not have to branch over to certain nodes like the mana nodes. However, it kind of ends up working out because I get to have a bit of everything, which is how I personally like to play for the moment. And I am still learning the intricacies of making my own builds, so it's definitely a learning process, and some constructive feedback would definitely be welcomed. So as you can see, I kind of do branch out all over the top half of the tree and try my best to allocate all of the aforementioned genre of nodes. I do use one unique jewel on the right side of the tree in the form of Intuitive Leap so that I can allocate 3 important nodes, which are an extra power charge, a mana node, which gives me percent mana recovery on kill, which is lovely for our mana sustain, and a life node, which gives me percent life recovery on kill, which is lovely for our life sustain. I also use a large 8 passive cluster jewel on the top right side of the tree, which gives me Doriani's Lesson, which gives me life leech through elemental damage, which is awesome. Scintillating idea, which gives me increased percent mana and lightning pen, and thunderstruck, which I love because it not only gives me lightning damage and crit chance, but my crits also knock back shocked enemies. And since we are an elementalist who has allocated Shaper of Storm, which causes all of my hits to shock, this means all of our crits will cause a knockback, which is a lovely added layer of defense. It keeps enemies from getting too close to me and slapping me. I don't like that. And also, I'm able to utilize the 2 empty jewel sockets to get forbidden jewels for a Shaper of Winter, which causes all my hits to also inflict chill, which is a nice defensive layer because it slows down whatever I hit and allows me to react a little better. And lastly, on my tree, I do have a Watcher's Eye Prismatic, which gives me percent chance to block attack damage while affected by Determination, and damage penetrates 10% lightning res while affected by Wrath, which I do have on my Divine Blessing setup, so I'll get even more damage every time I cast Wrath, and the added block chance helps me cap my attack block. Lastly, for my bandits, I help Alira for the added crit multi and all res. So there you have it. It was definitely a struggle figuring out the defensive layering for a witch because I've never done it before, but I think I understand it a bit better now, and I understand how to maneuver the tree a little better and what gear to get, and I hope to make more witch builds in the future. Even though I struggled, I definitely enjoyed putting this build together and enjoyed putting in the time to learn and research different aspects of the game to improve my understanding and everything. The build is pretty smooth, honestly, and doesn't die too often as long as I'm careful, of course, as most builds tend to need someone to be. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.